Very much, and good morning to you, everyone. I have the privilege of waking you up this morning in the Broadband World Forum 2013, where we are both to discuss technology, what's happening in the networks. Personally, I believe that we see a big meltdown in terms of a lot of technology being combined and the networks are being more and more consistent, even though there is a lot of innovation going on in each part of the network. We are here to celebrate that technology advancement, but we are also here to celebrate the success that our industry is enjoying. 1.1 billion users of Facebook are spending 400 minutes per month on the site. Amazing figures. 400 million tweets per day is what we are achieving. We are enjoying 100 billion downloads on smartphones of apps. All of this because the networks that we are building in this industry, all our companies together, those networks are really performing.
An office in the wild. Or in the air. A bank transfer from the tracks. An emergency update on the road. A weather forecast from the field. A shared experience. A container that talks to other containers. And an opponent in the other part of the world. That's what we call real performance.
Right, so is performance so important? That's what we will talk about, and we argue that it's the barrier for new services. Mobility. How important is mobility for broadband then? Well, first we can say that subscriptions in mobility is growing by 15 new subscriptions per second. So every second here, we add another 15 users to the mobile networks of the world. But the mobile broadband is growing with 30 new users every second. There is not a company in the world today that doesn't have mobility in their strategy in one way or another, either via an app or if you're a car company by revolutioning the entire car to be connected to the networks. Broadband and mobile broadband is giving internet to the masses in a scale that has never been seen before. It's combined with the development in cloud, where cloud is one of the biggest impacts to our industry ever. And we're seeing a migration of the traditional telecom IP industry into the IT industry in front of us. And that's a lot of new opportunities occurs, but also a lot of new things that we need to think about. One is, of course, around network security. Another one is around the challenges of integrity for each one of the users of the new services. Thus, we will see a lot of new regulation come in place in the European Union, in the United States, in other constellations, in China, etc., all over the world. And we are building the global network. We still call the telecoms networks of the world's largest, biggest machine. But that is also important to consider in this context. So what does all this fantastic development then mean for practical examples out of what's happening in the business? Well, one thing is that spectrum is getting very scarce. Every operator in the world is hunting for spectrum. I've said sometimes that spectrum in the long run will become more scarce resource on this planet than oil, which is a powerful statement and which makes regulators wake up to how important it is with the services that we're seeing. We're going to see traffic growth which over 10 years will 1,000-fold. We also see a big focus from just handing all of this traffic into real end-user experience. And that's what I will come back to a little bit later. It's a very common trend among many operators of the world to really try to measure what the end-user performance really was. Even services like Netflix would never have happened if the networks didn't have the performance that they have. The enterprises of the world are embracing, as I said, the mobile technology as being part of their strategy. It's not only car industry and so forth. It's almost any enterprise. And thus, they are also moving all of their software into clouds. And those clouds have to be connected, which means the networks will matter for the connection of clouds. All of this complexity drives the need for simplification and also the need for self-management and self-control over these networks. The transformation that we're going through is a node-centric world that we are leaving, going into the horizontal network that goes all the way from the end user's perception all the way into a cloud. That drive is very strong. The trick, and everyone is asking, is of course, how do we really do that? And the borderline between traditional IT and the telecoms and the IP networks is getting more and more blur. I'll give you a couple of funny examples because I thought these were pretty amusing. This is a car phone from 1969, one of the earlier car phones. Mobile systems at that time were very simple. You can see yourself, you dial there in the middle. And to the right, you have a lady in the floating fruit market in Thailand, in Bangkok, with a smartphone in her hand. What a tremendous transformation we have made. A smartphone today, one of the more advanced, has the same computing power or more than the whole NASA had in 1969, where the other picture was taken when they landed on the moon, which is just shows an example of what we're achieving in our industry. Here are some mainframe pictures. I love these. Data centers were big and built from the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. Then it slowed down because there was nothing more to build, so to say. And what was the problem with these huge data centers? They had one big problem. If you wanted to take advantage of all that computing power on the left side of this picture, you had to be physically in the data center. There were no networks to handle that. On the right, you have a picture of Google's site in New York. Staggering, there are no people in that picture. You don't have to be there. All that computing power is unleashed and out in the hands of millions and billions of users in terms of smartphones. So we're back to the centralization of computing power and storage and networking again. Why? The reason are that the networks matter so much. If we look at mobile broadband and just see the growth that mobile broadband has enjoyed, 6.5 billion subscriptions in the world today, almost full penetration, you could say, based on 4.5 billion subscribers, real subscribers. People have more than one phone. 1.5 billion mobile broadband subscriptions and 1.1 billion smartphones. 50% of all phones that are produced this year is smartphones, over 1.8 billion something phones that are being made. 80% of all mobile traffic is now data. These networks are completely data-centric, even though the antennas are standing there built for voice once with a distance to distance of which was arranged for a voice grid. So where is this taking us in the next 5 years? We're making a prediction, which we publish in something called the Mobility Report. It's something that we give out every half year where we're making strong predictions on how quickly the mobile part and the mobile broadband industry is really growing. We will go from those 1.5 billion mobile broadband users today up to 6.5 billion mobile broadband users in the next 5 years to 2018. From 1.1 billion smartphones to a staggering 4.5 billion smartphones in the world, making a complete revolution where we will give so many more people access to the internet, which we believe will transform industries, business, and society. So what's this doing to our behavior? Well, we have a new language, and you can hear it. I hear it from my children. You hear it from all around you. Texts have become tweet. Calls have become pokes. Download have become upload. Phones, even though people still call it a phone, most people, the majority of us, use a smartphone for less than 10% for voice, and we still call it a phone. Younger generation is more the device or the thing. Broadcast have become podcast. Signal strength, we used to watch the bars on the phone, has now become coverage for an app. The app works or it doesn't work. This is a change of language, but it is also a change in our behavior. Ericsson are have something called Consumer Lab, where we measure the behavior of individuals, how they make choices, etc. We've done research that shows that if you measure a number of factors on something called Net Promoter Score, and this research was done in 12 countries, US, Brazil, Turkey, UK, Japan, Korea, etc., to give a big flavor. Indonesia was as well there. This is the result of that. And surprisingly enough, you would see that network performance, even for our end users, comes out as twice as important on the Net Promoter Score as, for instance, charging and the cost for the subscription. And that shows something. Perhaps it shows that we need to really improve the networks, and I think that's one thing it shows. But it also shows that the awareness of being well covered and have a good performance on apps is very important. And that doesn't have anything to do, it has something to do with the radio network, but it doesn't stop there. It goes all the way, as I said, in the horizontal layer, up through the IP network, which plays a key role in this, and all the way up into the cloud, and the awareness of what is going on in the network. So if we look then at operators who really have focused on this, and this is quite interesting, another Ericsson research project where we have measured the growth, the average growth rate of operators who have made the jump best from voice-centric charging and billing and handling of their subscriptions and subscribers over to a data-centric model, charging only for data, perhaps, and having a more data-centric approach. You could see that they grow faster than the peer group. And this is actual facts from that research. We have published this. It's something called the growth codes, which is a pattern in what do they do more different than others to be successful in this. They have shown a 10% CAGR better than the peer group in terms of growth because they're doing things differently. And now, to the evidence. The growth codes, what do they do different? Gap minding, we call it. These are some marketing words now, so you have to be careful with this, but I've tried to explain what it is. So gap minding is what they do is that they make visionary investments. In other words, it's very difficult sometimes to make investments which are only based on business case. So they didn't make business case investments, they went and said visionary. We invest a lot in performance and see what it gives. That's a visionary investment. They are using something called streetwise metrics. Instead of measuring all the things in the entire network, they are measuring the things that really counts for the end users. So measure where it really matters. They're showcasing. Showcasing in this case means proving that performance really matters in advertising, in how they make proof points to their own staff around superior performance, etc. And that has paid off. They're doing something we call unboxing, which is really that they are packaging and segmenting their subscriptions differently. Much bigger granularity in the packaging, and also targeting different packages, mostly focused on differentiation on data, not even mentioning the voice. They are working ecosystematic, we call it, but that really means is that they are just open to use other brands together with their own. Skype is a good example, which has partnered up with several of these operators, etc. Things that are no longer seen as a threat, but as an opportunity once you're into the data charging models. They're co-partnering in terms of being able to incentivize others, for instance, sub-suppliers, on their own performance. And this whole recipe, these growth codes, as we call it, are really based on showing that a superior performance of the network counts. And what happens is that new services are being launched all the time in these networks compared to other networks. That's why it's so important. Why? What could this be used for in the future? Well, of course, to solve some of our global problems. 30% of the world's population live on 1% of the landmass, creating 60% of the world's traffic. That in itself is a massive problem, but it's also a great opportunity to build cities that are much more environmentally friendly, that make use of all this technology in order to solve problems of transportation, of Medicare, of metering, smart growth. Connectivity in this case is a hygiene factor, and we call all of this connectivity sometimes as the network society. And the network society is a society where anything that can benefit from having a connection to that big network will have one. We've done some work on defining this, particularly now when we are working with 5G, which is the next G in the mobile space, where we've said that the network needs to be redefined. It can no longer only be the operator's network. It has to be redefined as the global network, the big machine that I talked about. We need to go all the way into homes and see the endpoints of Wi-Fi and be able to control the end user experience all the way, understand what's happening there. The networks are really the limit of new services. Same with the devices. We need to redefine them. They can no longer be mobile phones. They need to be new kinds of devices, any kind of thing, the Google glasses, or if they are cars. So cars is also a device. And we say in here, which sounds pretty scary to me, but its human usage is a special case. That is really redefining the devices of the future. And performance and experience is the limit of new services. Now, we also introduced the term sentient network. That's a bit philosophical, but in philosophy you say that's the sense of smell or the sense of hearing or eyesight, and all of those together build our holistic picture of the world. In the same sense, we need to look at the networks to be self-aware, self-healing, scalable, always on. Subscriptions is the old way of looking at things. We're moving from subscriptions to connections to sessions. And the performance of each one of those sessions is what will really count in the future. And we will do this with 5 nines of security, the same mantra that has built up the industry from the beginning. Now, here are some very relevant technology pieces to build all of this up. First of all, we need, of course, an access network that is heterogeneous. It can be any kind of access. It can be Wi-Fi out there. It can be 3GPP radio standards. And the combination of that and fixed access through fiber networks, etc., all coming in to the converged network, the converged IP network. That's what's building up the heterogeneous network. We need all of that management and control to be there in terms of the evolution of OSS, BSS, using real-time analytics to set policies back to the network. And in the centerpiece, we need a 4th-generation IP-aware network that is using cloud technology and in particular SDN then. When I was here last year in the Broadband World Forum, I started to talk about something called Service Provider SDN. We have made a 1-year journey now on Service Provider SDN. But Service Provider SDN is different from the SDN that you find in the data center. I think many have caught on to this, and during the year we have had a big debate about the significance of SDN, particularly in the future IP networks. We're taking this even further. So we've proved the value of the idea of having an SDN control that goes all the way out from the access network, the radio network, all the way through the entire IP network into the clouds themselves, starting where the application actually resides. We've proved the vision. We've done some service chaining examples, for instance, with Telstra in Australia, to prove that this works in a very good way and that you can reprogram the network based on the services that are coming in real time, because this is all real time. We're introducing the ideas, of course, working with OpenStack and the OpenFlow and Open Daylight open source code projects to make sure that we make this an open way of working and not something proprietary to one company. If we're going to succeed in what I call the network relevance and making the networks more relevant for the future, this has to be done in a very open environment. And now, in this show, we're talking much about extending Service Provider SDN into the clouds. And why would we do that? Because it is extremely important to understand that in the operator private cloud space, we have virtualization going on, something that is supported with the standardization work in NFV, where Ericsson takes a strong role and a leading role, particularly on the architecture side, to make NFV a reality. We're virtualizing all our applications the next 2 years, which belongs to the telecom space. We're introducing the Ericsson cloud system to make sure that we are able to make this in an open and controlled way with orchestration using the OSS. And we're introducing Service Provider SDN as an open standard all the way through, from the radio access systems up to the clouds. The idea of all this is, of course, to create the networks for the network society. The networks that can be relevant, not only to a smartphone user, but that can be relevant to all other industries. Here are a few examples of parameters that will count in that. Throughput, latency, quality of service, volumes, coverage, capacity, security, location, all of these and many, many more. And we've done some research on how relevant they would be for car industry, processing, utilities, transport, media, etc. Each industry having their own requirements. In the future, the requirements on the networks will come from everyone who wants to use it. Here, you could look at the opportunity of start to do network slicing. This is more than just a VPN going through the network. This is what you can do with service provider SDN if it's introduced through the whole network, from the clouds to the users, where you can create a network slice that at any given moment can deliver a bit at just the right quality, just the right speed, with just the right performance. But that is very tricky to get there. We're very far away from this today. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the idea of making the networks extremely relevant in the network society. That's why it's so important to introduce the technology that will make this possible. Innovation is something that we will talk about a lot during these days when we meet in meetings out in the Broadband World Forum. And I just wanted to give you a few examples of innovation that our company is doing. Just one pick in the bunch, but of course one that I'm very close to. I'm sure there will be many others who are innovating and doing a lot of things. We do innovation in Ericsson very much because we have so big services arm as well. We are the largest service supplier in the whole telecom industry. So we're supporting some 1 billion subscribers in the world with running the networks and so forth. So we get a lot of information on what can be done out there. And we're gathering that. It's a lot about mastering complexity and leveraging the scale that we have in order to be very innovative. So let me show you a couple of examples. This one, I don't know if anyone has seen this before. It looks like a small dot, and we call it also the dot. It's called the Ericsson radio dot system. This is a radio base station, a very, very small one, and it is used for indoor coverage. It's an example of revolutionizing indoor coverage. Actually, you can even take it apart. So the antenna here is frequency dependent, and then you have the small amplifier part inside. It's one example that caused a lot of discussion, in particular in future radio coverage. It increases capacity dramatically and cost and so on. But this is a part of innovation, important things. A lot of this is also about edge routing. When we come down to the service awareness at the end of the network, I talked about the converged network with the different accesses into the heterogeneous network. And here it is very important to also be very innovative. We're introducing a new this is a little guy, but this is a piece of silicon. 128 cores, 1,024 threads, I think, for computing. The trick with all this, and it's not only us doing this is important to say, this is an industry thing. We need to make these kind of processors. We call ours SMP 4000. We need to make these kind of processors to be able to address the programmability of the IP network. This one is programmable in C, C++ language, GNU, and that gives it the possibility to program not only layer 1, 2, 3, but we can go all the way up to the applications, actually including layer 7 when it comes to programming the chip. So these are some of the innovations that are important. One more. We're working a lot with Facebook. I opened by saying how many people are really using that service. It's a tremendous service. One of the key successes for them was when they went mobile. And you could also see that by improving, for instance, the downloading times of things in Facebook, we went from 22 seconds to 6 seconds in 18 months by working proactively with all the protocols and so forth to make it more efficient. This is the kind of performance enhancements that we need to do. Why would we need to do that? We need to do that to make the networks more relevant. If we don't do that, the only thing that will happen is that the services will not happen. So it's up to us. It's up to our industry. So let me just summarize. We are going through a tremendous change when it comes to the future terminals. It's no longer just the computer screen at home, or the television set, or the handset. It's all kinds of other things that doesn't even have a screen that is going to be the devices. Those things will often happen if the performance of the networks is really there. Cloud is coming in with all the technology changes and the blur change into the IT industry. And that is introducing virtualization, but it's also giving us the opportunity to use the programmability of the networks in a new way. We are able to introduce SDN in the telecom networks, in the IP networks that can reach all the way into the world's clouds, because there is no doubt that all the future services will be in clouds, large ones and more private clouds connected to different industries in the future. In order to do this in the good way, the only thing, you remember the old mainframe picture and the Google Center, is if the networks are good enough and if they can really perform. That means that the networks take a center stage in this future vision. It means that in the Broadband World Forum, when we are here, the discussion is very much around how we can achieve that higher performance. And if you read the hieroglyphs at the bottom, is the mobility, the broadband, and the cloud, putting the networks at the center stage, taking us to the network society. Thank you very much.